Welcome to the Environmental Leadership Chronicles, a podcast brought to you by the California Association of Environmental Professionals. In this episode, we're joined by Josh Metz, Executive Director and co-founder of the Monterey Bay DART Initiative. With over 2 decades of experience in land planning, environmental design, and economic development, plus degrees from UC Berkeley and postgraduate work at UC Santa Barbara, Josh brings a unique perspective to the intersection of technology, environmental sustainability, and community development. His vision for creating a DART innovation ecosystem in the Monterey Bay region stems from his background leading the Fort Ord Reuse Authority, where he guided the successful transformation of the former military base. Most recently, Josh has been spearheading exciting developments in workforce innovation, including a pilot project with Joby Aviation and Cal State Monterey Bay. If you're interested in learning more about the future of advanced air mobility and uncrewed aerial systems, check out the 2026 Monterey Bay DART Live Summit. It's happening March 31st through April 2nd, 2026 at the Monterey Conference Center. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy. Hi, I'm Jessa.
Hi, I'm Corinne.
And today we are joined by Joshua Metz, who is the Executive Director and co-founder of Monterey Bay DART. Welcome to the podcast, Josh. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And so first things first, as we always start off, what is your connection to AEP?
Yeah, well, AEP, I think I first saw it on the poster on the wall at one of my grad school days, and I know they had some meetings after campus with beers and stuff like that. So I think I attended a few of those, and then most recently when you guys reached out.
All right, I love it. I love the spectrum from beers, happy hour beers to the podcast.
Oh, it was a great way to get people together, I guess, especially in college.
Shameless plug for AEP is that you'll never leave hungry or thirsty. So come to our event.
I love it. Done. And Josh, so before we started recording, we were talking. You have many hats. You have a very interesting and unique career path. And so, starting off, though, can you tell us a little bit more about what led you to a degree in the environmental industry and kind of a passion for this career path?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it has been a windy road, and I think going down the road, it all sort of came back around. So a lot of connections that happened earlier, and then reconnections that I think amplify projects and things that I have been working on later in life. So I think the main point is have faith in your process. It may take you twists and turns, but in the end, I think all of that experience can become really valuable. So I started, I would say, career in the environmental field when I pretty much first went to college, got out of high school. I decided, rather than signing up for a first year in college, that me and 3 or 4 of my friends put our college year on hold and moved to Tahoe for skiing and outdoor recreation, which was great. I spent about 2 years up there. And then by the time I did get to college at Humboldt State, now Cal Poly Humboldt, I was really just enthusiastic about kind of outdoor experiential education. And it was such a great place to pursue those interests up at Humboldt, with all the access to the forests and the rivers. And I did find that when I got to college initially, somehow, while I had not been super academic in high school, I just got inspired by what I found there. And so I found this way to blend my enthusiasm for outdoor recreation with some scientific pursuits, and that led to this getting a degree in environmental biology 5.5 years later. So, and then, just from there, it was about following the opportunities and always kind of looking for something that was kind of had a bit of fun and, excitement to it, adventure.
I love that. I love the adventure part of it and just kind of following things that come along.
Yeah.
And so, my understanding too is that you also have a master's degree in landscape architecture.
Correct. Yeah. So after graduating from Humboldt, I was when I was a undergrad, I had I didn't come from a wealthy family, and so we had uh, financial aid that was a work study program, and I found work at this hidden gem of a place up in Arcata called the Redwood Sciences Lab, which is a USDA Forest Service research facility focused really on developing science to inform forest management. And at that time, in the early 90s, this is when some people, there was a thing called the Redwood Summer. It was a big activism space for people to try to, address impacts of, decades, centuries of redwood harvest and forest harvest in general. There was a big Northwest Forest Plan that was developed uh, about, you might recognize things like the spotted owl and the marbled murrelet. These were, special bird species that were indicators of forest health. A lot of that research related to that kind of stuff was run through these research labs. There's the regional labs, and there's one like up in Seattle, and there's one in Arcata. There's one in Berkeley, I think. So I ended up having a job there for was pretty much 4 years. Most of the time I was at Humboldt. And so by the time I finished, I had all this firsthand experience, working kind of as a scientific aid to these, mostly PhD researchers, doing a lot of field work in the national forests and the rivers around. And so the group that I worked for had this niche. It was kind of a funny little niche, but they were aquatic scientists, and they focused on it's called herpetology, which is like the study of salamanders and frogs and stuff like that. And so, I just it was kind of fun work. We'd go out and on the rivers, and one project was like a studying turtle populations on the Trinity River. And so we literally spent our time, putting little beacons on turtles and tracking them, figure out how they use the habitat. And, we ended up, it was part of a PhD thesis out of Berkeley that was looking at the impacts of um, dam installation on the Trinity River, which happened in like the 60s. And it had totally changed the river pattern. And so they wanted to see what the difference was. So, it just became this great experience. And that led to some opportunities actually back in the Sierras in Tahoe, kind of taking some of the methods that were developed at the research lab and applying them to efforts then underway to develop long-term ecological monitoring protocols for the Sierra Nevada National Forest. And so spent a few years doing that, and then decided at one point, I remember being way out in some forest road overlooking a big valley of beautiful High Sierra and going, I've seen a lot of beautiful, landscapes. Be nice to maybe see some people. So I, so I decided then to apply to grad school in landscape architecture and environmental planning. And that's how we wound up back at Berkeley. Yeah. And that was a great experience as well. You want me to keep talking about that one, or?
I want to know if you ever got to see a marbled murrelet in the wild.
Oh, a marbled murrelet? No, I'd say the most interesting kind of flying thing that I saw was a flying squirrel. which I got to see it, fly from one tree to the next, I mean, albeit I've seen golden eagles and bald eagles and big things like that, kind of, funny little creatures, owls and, stuff like that. It's, when we were doing the turtle work, we float down the river one time and there was a mountain lion right on the side of the river, or, bears, big salmon. We spent a lot of time diving in the river, and that was part of that. I ended up getting not a master's, but a minor in scuba diving and diving at Humboldt because of that experience. It was like this great way to get out and, experience the water. And I really ended up more than anything appreciating freshwater diving and rivers, because it's cleaner and you can see more generally. Anyhow, that's a diversion.
I love it. I love how you take all these interests and you're like, how can I turn this into a major career? How do I do this more professionally?
Yeah, well, that is funny because I talked about some of the loops and turns of a career path, but one of my experiences working on some of the stuff we were doing in the Tahoe area, these long-term ecological monitoring protocols.
Mhm.
So my focus there was special aquatic habitats. So I was always like a specialist, and so there was very few people that would kind of do the little projects that I was able to do there. But we set up these teams of people. We surveyed um, 14 watersheds on 10 national forests up and down the Sierra, from like Modoc Lassen all the way down to the southern Sierra, down to Lake Isabella. And my job was to kind of manage these teams. And so I'd go and out in front of them and go to the site and put flagging up where they were supposed to go. And this was in the early days of GPS had just come out, and GIS as a tool was still pretty young and emerging. But so we'd go out and then we'd have to like do these measuring protocols to try to establish sort of a baseline condition. And a lot of times it would, because they're on these high elevation stream and kind of spring seep locations, they'd be way out in the forest, but then also there was a lot of alder that grows around these areas, or riparian habitat. So very dense brush, and you'd have to kind of hack your way through it or twist and turn your way through it with like a tape measure to measure these things. It was always quite ridiculous how much precision you might want to put down in your data. And I can remember standing aside one of these at one time and going, boy, it sure would be great if we just had like a stick that would like go up and kind of measure the area of the place that we're trying to measure, or some kind of thing that we could have, that would make, we just make all of this much simpler and more accurate and repeatable. And, lo and behold, whatever it is now, 20 years later, with the focus on the drone stuff, that has occurred to me more than once, that kind of linkage there.
I'm looking at my notes and looking at your LinkedIn, and I'm like, we need like parts 2, 3, and 4 at a minimum. So,
Yeah.
but the Monterey Bay DART company and how you
Yes.
started that and some of the work you're doing with that, I think would be great to learn about.
I'm going to get right there, because in 2010, from home guy, this is even before the pandemic, and I was working a lot on the computer, and so I'd go outside in the front of the house during parts of the day and do gardening. And then this old guy who lived in the neighborhood would come by a lot, and we started talking, and and he was asking what I was up to, and then we got to know each other. Jerry Bowden, he was the attorney for this regional redevelopment activity in Monterey that was focused on the rebuild of Fort Ord. Fort Ord was a 45 square mile area between Monterey Peninsula and Salinas that had served as the U.S. Army's infantry training ground on the West Coast for about 100 years. And it was closed in 1994 as part of a national, efficiency program and called BRAC, Base Realignment and Closure. And down in San Diego, there's a bunch of closed bases that happened at that time. So anyhow, a little bit later, turns out we have a baby on the way, and I'm talking with Jerry, and he says, "So what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm doing my, single consulting." He says, "You probably need something a little more stable for the, what's coming." And so I said, "Well, you're probably right." So he introduced me to the director of the Fort Ord Reuse Authority, and they were hiring a planner. And, I'd had enough fun times in the wine business, and my wife was still involved with that. So I didn't feel like I was going too far. And so I was hired down there just 2 weeks before my daughter was born, which was perfect timing. And then I ended up working at the Fort Ord Reuse Authority for 7 years, first as a planner, where I was involved in urban design projects and trails planning, like bike trails and stuff like that, commuter trails. And then they hired, there was a job they started advertising for called economic development, and they, it was paid, 30% more than what my other job was paid for. And it was much less, bureaucratic. It was more entrepreneurial. And so first they tried to hire some people, big, heavyweights from out of state, and it didn't work. And so they reopened it again. So at that point I said, whatever that is, I can do that, And so, yeah, I got hired to be the economic development guy. And that just created this whole opening of learning about kind of regional economies, and went through a whole bunch of different stuff there. And, because it was a BRAC project, you had access to the DOD people, and Monterey's just got this rich history of that with the Naval Postgraduate School there, and a bunch of cool stuff. And then, there's this old military place that had a bunch of old assets there that we were supposed to try to utilize. And so my focus was on job creation on Fort Ord. And so, I'm just kind of learning about how the economy works. And then there was this airport on Fort Ord. It was used to be a helicopter squadron training airport called the Marina Municipal Airport. And it was, the whole time I was there, it was just kind of this dusty place that nobody really went to. And then, at one point, I think it was in 2017, I was in my neighborhood in Santa Cruz, and I had this other neighbor down the street that had like a Sprinter van, with and he had this, it was, this big rack on the top, and it was coming and going at all kinds of weird hours. So I was one day out taking my garbage out, and here comes this guy, taking his garbage out and by the Sprinter van, and we start to talk, and his name's Chris Bly, and he starts telling me about a program that he is trying to find partners for. That is, the FAA is looking for communities that want to be host for what they call the UAS, so Uncrewed Aerial Systems Integration Pilot Program, the UAS IPP. And he said, the main thing I need is a community with an airport that would sign on and be a partner. And I said, well, I got an airport, and
I
so we
love
got,
these like life-changing conversations that happen with your neighbors in your front yard.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's the point of, think globally, act locally kind of a thing,
There you go.
You
Yeah,
never
sorry to
know.
interrupt you. Yeah.
No, I think that's a good point, and part of my definitely, you know, I can't point to one job that I got by randomly applying for the thing. They have all been through an introduction by somebody, So
I think too something you said too to touch on this is that you're kind of putting yourself out there too and asking questions and connecting with people too,
right.
which I think is really important. So you see this van and it's like curiosity and it's just kind of like, hey, and
Well, I want one of those vans.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so that we got together that over the holidays and put together some kind of crazy proposal. Chris had a business. He was an entrepreneur, and he had a business first. He was a rock climber, and so he had started this business using rock climbing equipment and techniques to inspect wind power stations. So he started this whole business called Rope Partner, which became like an international service business, hiring all these dirtbag rock climbers to do this work and training them in the west side of Santa Cruz. It really became a thing. But along the way, he had heard from his customers that while the service is great, it's too expensive and goes too slow. So you need another way to get the data that they need, which is where these things are wearing down. And so that's where he got into drones, and he started using drones um, my daughter just passed me a note here.
Passing
Okay.
notes in class? Come on.
Yeah. So he was using drones to do the inspection, and so that's how he was kind of into this whole thing. So we got together. We basically ran up a flag saying we're applying for this thing, and there were a bunch of startups that were in the Santa Cruz, Monterey area. And there were some university partners, University UC Santa Cruz and Cal State Monterey Bay. And so because of being an economic development person and had a bunch of access to these people, and Chris had access to the startups. And so we put together a coalition, turned out to be a pretty strong coalition, including Janet Napolitano from the University of California big office. She gave us a letter, and we chased it down. We were not awarded, but we did hear from the FAA at their conference in Baltimore that, if you're one of the 250 communities around the country that are going after this thing and aren't designated, don't stop what you're doing, because it's the future of, integrating autonomous flight into the airspace. And in that group, we also engaged with this secretive startup up in the hills of Santa Cruz called Joby Aviation. And they were actually developing this vertical takeoff and landing aircraft concept in an old rock quarry in Bonnie Doon, which is in the hills above Santa Cruz. And their founder is this, genius guy who, done his engineering degree at Stanford and sold a company and bought this old quarry, and they were like putting everything into it. And so in 2018, I think that's when we founded the nonprofit, really as a follow-on to what we heard from the FAA and with the advice of a guy from UC Santa Cruz, that we could be this entity that sort of connects industry, government, academia to move on a long-term strategic project. Because we just saw there that these tools, these autonomous flying things, or even piloted flying things, have had so many uses, a whole broad set of use cases that were interesting and relevant, whether it's, agriculture, natural resource management, national security, public safety, transportation, people and goods, all those kinds of things. And so that's kind of what we did. We set up this nonprofit, and I didn't know much about nonprofits at the time. I'm still learning quite a bit, but that gave us sort of a flag to wave, and so we started putting on conferences, players in this space all across these sectors, and really, we've seen that there's huge upside potential for jobs growth and economic development from this sector. And I think that the big story that I'll wrap up here with, because I know I've been kind of going on a bit, is what happened with the convergence of Joby Aviation's growth and the presence of a large philanthropy making strategic investments in the Salinas Valley. That's the James Irvine Foundation. And so, as we moved into, I think it was 2019-ish, Joby was coming out of their secretive phase and needing to get into like real facilities to handle aircraft flight and eventually manufacturing. And so I got a phone call one day from one of the Joby people that was looking to get somebody at the Marina Airport to answer the phone because they wanted to consider putting their manufacturing facilities there. And I said, I can help with that. And so I, made sure to get the right people together, and, they moved over there, and now they've been there about 6 or 7 years. And, we've developed, I've remained on the outside. They don't give us any funding, but they do, we've been big advocates for their success, because they end up, that was the mission that I was hired for, which was to bring jobs to Fort Ord. And this is, they ended up now having, I think, approaching 1,000 people there at their facility in Marina, and they're manufacturing these incredible airplanes over there. It's like a whole new industry that's growing up around that. And so that's kind of one of our program areas became workforce development, and the Irvine Foundation got really interested in that because we were helping people from the communities they're caring about in the Salinas and Pajaro Valley, sort of the low wage workers, to create opportunities for higher wage career pathways for them. And so we did an apprenticeship program training people how to manufacture, do this carbon layup, high-tech manufacturing. We took people that were like butchers and farm workers and hospitality workers, and got them into jobs that, like, all of a sudden they're making 30% more per hour, and having this incredible opportunity to go into this growing sector. So it's been pretty exciting. Working with Irvine's been just a privilege and a pretty incredible experience, and now we're just kind of on a roll. So we'll see what happens next.
So few people love an acronym more than AEP in our audience. So what does MB DART stand for?
Yeah. So Monterey Bay, that was part of our name, Monterey Bay, and DART stands for Drones, Automation, and Robotics Technology. So we were just saying, all these things, the capabilities of putting them together and applying them to a whole range of potential sectors is what we're involved in. And, that's both a blessing and a curse. Your name, it sort of gives people a picture of what you do, but it also kind of puts you in a box. And, more than anything, I think it's a, really fascinating, exciting time and innovation, with all this stuff that's going on, this AI, all that kind of stuff. And so having a small voice at in the table, making interesting, helping make interesting things happen and stuff like that. It's just really exciting. And I think if there's any hope for the environmental professional types or the environment itself, it's got to be a combination of our, technological innovation with our, understanding of science and traditional knowledge, stuff like that. We're not going backwards.
So on that, what is an innovation you see, that is practicable or could be achievable in like 10 years that you're most excited about?
10 years. Things are going to happen quick. I can tell you that, all this stuff that's going on. Yeah, I mean, I think what Joby and others are doing with this, both electric and hydrogen powered aviation, hydrogen fuel cell stuff, I think has got real potential for decarbonizing aviation, but also, this new form factor of aircraft they have, which is these electric vertical takeoff and landing, so they can take off like a helicopter and fly like a plane. It's going to actually have the potential to dramatically influence what I think the built environment can look like, where people live and work. I think we've seen with the pandemic that, people scattered all around and are working far away from where their job center is traditionally. And, so I think all of that's pretty exciting. I know there's a lot of hurdles and hype and, I think people think it could be only for the rich, which it probably will be for the beginning. But I think if you look at, I don't know, Tesla, for example, the early adopters of that were certainly high net worth people, but over time it became more accessible to others. I think that's kind of what people are hoping for with that. And then, on a less, on a, I don't know, less, techno side, I think, well, I know in our conference that's upcoming, there's we've been adapting the program because of the LA fires, and I know there's a lot of interest in the potential of these, I'd say, family of technologies, including remote sensing and all of that, to both help, prevent, predict, respond, and recover from fires. And so I think in all of those arenas, there's use cases where some of these tools can be applied, for our benefit. I don't think it's a panacea, and I don't think it's going to solve everything. But if you're a person who's deep into the, sector, and you're thinking, could my, drones tell us where we should be, doing, vegetation thinning, or, where there's a area that's at risk for landslide after a fire. I mean, are these kind of mapping type projects, or could be used to inspect, which they are being used quite extensively to inspect power infrastructure, transmission lines, and all that stuff, which affects fire frequency. And so I think things like that, that obviously drones are in the news quite a bit these days, and the military and DoD applications are the most, that's actually where probably the biggest market is if you're into that. But I think there's also a lot of really valuable uses for public benefit, and that's kind of what we try to focus on, or at least dual use applications. And that's where we found some alignment with our friends in the DoD, is that, whatever, problems, the civilian systems face, the DoD people face all those same problems, and have to be mobile and all that. So I think there's, if you look back in history of how technological innovation has happened, and even benefits to civilian world have often come out of investments made on the DoD side. So So we're open to working with them too, and we do. Mm.
Well, we are about at our time, but I want to see any last statements or Corinne, any questions before we wrap up? Some more questions?
Careful what can of worms you open up.
I know. I love it. I was like, man, there's so much to dig into.
I was gonna toss you a softball, Josh, and ask what is your favorite wine region in California? And you can't say Sonoma.
Yeah. So that's fair enough. I would say if I'm looking for like best quality wine, kind of coolest vibe and kind of landscape together, I would say the Anderson Valley in Mendocino County. They've got incredible winemaking out there, and it's a little bit windy road to get out there, but if once you get out there, it's like a dream. And then you can drive out to the coast through these, old growth redwood forest, and it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
A lot of windy road metaphors and literal
All right.
concepts, but I love it. And that's a great way to wrap up, to a wrap up rapid five. So the first question is, what is your favorite daily habit?
Oh, these days it's well, just getting stuff. No, walking the dogs is what I'll say.
What are three things you would bring to a deserted island?
Hmm. I would say keys, wallet, phone, check, but that's not good. Yeah, sunglasses, pocket knife, and a bottle of water.
Very practical.
Sunglasses is good. I don't know that
Yeah.
we've had that yet. And
No,
I think that's a really critical one.
I know. I'm
Yeah.
like making a note of that. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Then what is your favorite environmental policy?
Boy, I love clean water. So whatever we can do to keep our water fresh, we need clean air too. But anything about, all this talk about the water with the fires and all that, it's complicated. But there's nothing like a freshwater stream and a river or a lake. I mean, that's the dream. That's where I'd spend my time if I could.
And what is your favorite flora or fauna?
Well, I like on the flora, I like roses. I'm growing roses in my yard, and I just like them because they were kind of, kind of wild, but beautiful, and they smell nice. And then uh, fauna, I'd say I like newts. So they're kind of like a salamander, rough,
And
The
then
herpetology did you well.
Yeah, yeah,
good
yeah.
callback. I was just gonna do that.
I have fond memories of that time, and just great little creatures.
And finish this sentence. Wouldn't it be cool if?
Oh man, wouldn't it be cool if we could all just get along?
Well, thank you so much, Josh. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you for having me. I hope I covered some territory of interest and didn't wear you out too much there. I know there's a lot, but I look forward to hearing what you put together. And
Not
yeah, did we do the introduction part, or does that come later?
hold on. I'll
You're
stop.
going to record the introduction.